former Republican. You were the Republican, right, surrogate for the St. Louis County Board of Commissioners, St. Louis City?
No, it was for the first time in 12 years. That started in 2005. I was the chairman of the election board, and so four-member board, two Republicans and two Democrats. So I was the chairman, and I had a Democratic treasurer, and the four of us ran the elections. That's the way that works.
And oddly enough, they ran very smoothly while you were there.
Well, I mean, I will say this. It's fascinating, McGraw, and you're learning about it. You're telling your viewers. Election systems are really complicated systems, and one of the things we discovered, and we're discovering again in this incident, is that if you don't pay attention, there's two ways to commit fraud. One is incompetence, general incompetence. The other is intentional sort of fraud. And when I got there had been just neglect. They had not kind of staffed things up well, and they had not kind of put controls in place. And we did, in fact, run, for about 3.5, 4 years. I was on the board for about 2, but my successors were all kind of people we worked with. We ran things really well, and you run things really well for two reasons. One, you want to count the votes. It's important, obviously, but you also want the public to believe the system works, because otherwise they start to check out. And I think that's the real crisis you're seeing now. And, to be honest, Jane Duker and these people that are out there, sort of telling everyone how great it works, nobody believes it, you see. So not only do they look like liars, they really are doing a disservice to the public, who can see that something's really wrong. It's a real mess.
All right, Ed Martin, many people have said to me that you can't, maybe something was wrong, but you can't prove it, so therefore the election has to stand.
Well, I mean, this is the old Robin Carnahan canard. Robin Carnahan used to say, you can't show me enough, voter fraud convictions, and so there must not be voter fraud. And what I told people when I got in the first election registration period, we had something like 2,000 registration cards submitted by Acorn groups, that Acorn group, Acorn-like groups funded by them, that were just a mess. They were done out of the phone book it looked like we had someone tell us they just took the phone book in a Burger King and they copied it in. I mean, messy stuff. Now, you don't just commit that. There's no value in registering people falsely for elections. You don't get extra money from the federal government, nothing. The only reason to do is to commit voter fraud. In this case we're looking at now, by the way, that this is a common problem. In fact, it's a common problem in the Hubbard district. Back then when I was there, we had 2 towers right near Carr Square, and they voted in absentee in a special election in a ridiculously high number, like 90% of everyone voted. And so we said, this can't be right, and we went out and we voted in person, and a more reasonable number voted about 60 or 70%. And what we knew was there was someone gaming the system. We couldn't prove who it was. No one would come forward. But, you don't have to have a conviction to know that there was a real problem. And I think we see the same thing in this case right now.
There have been allegations in the newspaper that Rodney Hubbard in years past has dropped off buckets of quote-unquote absentee ballots.
Yeah, I mean, look, this is I don't put it only on Hubbard, but this is one of the ways that the game was rigged. I mean, it's kind of a well-known thing. Absentee ballots are something that you can go around. You could do it one of two ways. You can go around a neighborhood and you can ask people who can't vote because they're legitimately, there's a reason, and get them to vote, or you can go get people's absentee ballots and apply for them and stuff the ballot box. And I think, that's happened, by the way. It's been alleged to happen in every jurisdiction everywhere, and Hubbard has a reputation for that. Look, the more important thing is when you're in court, and Jane Duker, she's sort of well known. She's not only a lawyer for all these folks, but she's a media personality, holds herself out as one. But Jane Duker stands up in court, and you have to say, like, wait a second, something happened here. And when you stand up and say nothing to see here, nothing, don't look here, don't worry, everybody looks up and says, that's just not the truth. And there's a problem with that. And I will say this, the absentee ballot problem is one that's always a challenge at the election board because you get overwhelmed. And what we need, and I'll say this, the Democrats in charge of the election board I don't think are giving the staff there the kind of encouragement to fight this off, because it takes a lot of encouragement to do this. And by that encouragement, I mean both staffing, money, and the political cover to go and fight this, because the city is a really intimidating situation. So it's an absolute mess, and I think the one good thing is it gives everyone a reason to wonder and therefore double down on protecting the elections.
Ed Martin, is there anything you've seen or heard that rises to the level of voter fraud crosses some type of criminal line, something they can prove this time around.
Yeah, they just have to want to prove it. I mean, look, I'll tell you, we brought some fraud to the city circuit attorney when I was there, and the circuit attorney didn't want to delve into it. I mean, I hate to give the Post-Dispatch too much credit because I think they sometimes aren't fair, but Messenger's column recently about follow the money. I mean, the fact is that there's been crimes committed. And then, frankly, there's probably federal crimes. If you put something in the mail, if you put something in an election that has anything that touches the federal system, you've committed a crime. The question now is whether someone wants to go after it. I will tell you that one exciting thing about a new president, of my party, would be that we would get a new U.S. attorney, a new federal prosecutor who might take seriously these questions. Someone could go to jail very easily over this. The problem is, for decades, they've known, don't worry, the worst thing you can do is you get your hand wrapped. I'll tell you, back in the day, what they would do is hang out to dry the lowest person on the totem pole, the person who fills out the registration card or the absentee ballot. I mean, you go and find an absentee ballot that's fraudulently filled out. Unless the person whose name is on it will admit who did it, you got some 71-year-old lady who says, I don't know how that happened. Well, you can't prosecute her, right? So you've got to find your way back. You've got to flip somebody. But I would say almost certainly there's conduct that rises to the level of crimes. And, again, for Duker and these other lawyers to stand up in court and say, nothing to see here, it's the height of disservice to the system. And I think, again, we need a federal prosecutor and a state attorney general who will wade in and actually put a couple of people. In St. Louis City, when we shined the light on Acorn, they moved out of the city. Now, they only went to the county, but they don't want scrutiny. They want to keep doing what they're doing.
Well, Acorn doesn't exist anymore for many of the reasons you are talking about. But let me ask you this. The judge has to rule, and it sounds like the judge is going to rule today. You've read the stories. You know this. You've been there. You've been in that seat there at the Board of Elections. Does he have a case to overturn this election?
Well, I think he's got the legal case is a pretty high barrier. You don't overturn elections too easily. And I will actually say that the margin, more than 2 or 3 votes. It's funny, you learn in an election, 50 or 60 votes is actually a lot of votes. And even in a statewide race, when it's 1,000 votes or 2,000, it's hard to turn as many as you think. So he's got to see enough evidence of enough fraud to overturn the election. And so I think it's a high bar. But imagine if you're him, what you're saying right now is, would I be, if it's close, would I be better to shine the light of integrity on the thing? What I did in our case, we saw these absentee ballots. I brought down all the parties, and I said, I'm not blaming anybody now. That's not my job. But I'm going to revote this whole thing because people got to believe this is a serious system that is fair. And if we revote it now, everyone will see. The Klieg lights will be on. So I would think the judge could say, hey, it's close enough that I'm going to ask this to be done in a way that's really transparent and gives people confidence. Again, I told you the election system needs 2 things. It needs the votes counted, but it needs to be done in a way that the people believe it's working. Otherwise, they start to check out. If you go into, we used to do this, go into North Side and try to get voter registration, and too many people, this happens, by the way, in college campuses too, they say my vote doesn't count, and they don't bother. So you can't have too many of these instances. So it'll be interesting to see, but I don't have a great sense on what the judge will do.
I agree with you in that if he upholds the election, right, then he is condoning bad behavior. And so he is awarding bad behavior to the winner.
Right. Well, and here's the thing: is bad behavior is not the judge's job. It's bad behavior that is breaking the law. So
right.
But I agree with you, and especially in a public way. I don't know the facts of the case to the details he would on how many instances you can see. If you've got enough to see it, then I think in this case, and again, the city of St. Louis has such a reputation to be careful about in terms of elections. We have to be higher standard. That's how you tell our people.
But the law says you have to accept an absentee ballot with an envelope, and there were all these instances where there weren't envelopes with these absentee ballots. It seems to me like, boom, right there, the whole thing should be thrown out.
Well, again, I'm not an expert on that part of the law. I mean, certainly, you do have, we go back to Florida in 2000. What's the intention of the voter? There's a question of if I showed you a ballot that was filed that was clearly, someone who had done it, their intention was to do it as a mistake. But if there's a pattern of dozens and dozens and hundreds or whatever, then you say, wait a second, this is a game they're playing. So, but again, I think the whole country is watching. I think from our standpoint, it's a great lesson to be learned that you have to work hard at the integrity of elections, and it's a bad lesson for us to have, in St. Louis again, but it's a good lesson for people. And again, I tell you, McGraw, you look at these lawyers, the election system, you cannot play games with that. You have to be above the sort of conflict of interest kind of stuff. It just is such a disservice to the system.
How was Bill O'Reilly last night?
He was on vacation, of course. I told my wife, she's like, "You're on Bill O'Reilly." I said, "Well, he's on vacation, so it's not like Bill asked for me." But it was good. It was exciting and fast. You know how these things are. You think,
Right.
"Oh, I'm on Bill O'Reilly. It's going to
Right.
be like great." It's about 90 seconds and you're done.
Right,
So
right,
it
right.
was good.
Yeah. By the time they ask you the first question, you're like, okay, thanks for coming in, Ed Martin from St. Louis. Yeah, you
Yeah,
betcha.
exactly. That's right. So it was fun, though.
All right, Ed, thanks for checking in. Talk to you soon.
All right, McGraw. See you.
You got it. 7:29. Big